congratulations on your Excellence in Acting Award from Denver Film Festival, installment 43, I believe.
Oh my
You're in
goodness.
good company, but now they're in really great company.
Thank you. Uh so awkward with things like this, but honestly, thank you, thank you to Denver Film Festival for this amazing honor, and I'm just happy to have experienced that experience. So it's been a wild ride so far.
No
But
doubt.
thank you. Thank you so
So
much.
it's, well, they have good taste, so I'm glad that they saw fit to give you an award. Um, this is a lovely film, Minari, and you seem to, I mean, you are an executive producer on it, I believe,
Hmm.
and I think you have a pretty intimate relationship to its coming to fruition. So I wanted you to talk a little bit about like how that happened, and what,
Yeah.
I think that you saw the script before the people at Plan B did.
Hmm.
So how did that happen?
It was, there's a longer story to this that I don't want to bore you with, but it has to do a little bit with, in some ways, taking steps towards determining my own choices and making sure that the people that were around me, as wonderful as everyone that's been a part of my personal journey has been, sometimes you realize like you hold other people in such high esteem that you're waiting for them to like facilitate you through a system, and you're waiting for permission to get through. And um, that was a turning point for me in my life, where I realized, I was like, oh, like it's it's always kind of rested on my choice, and so maybe it's time to give weight to my own choice. And I just took that step, and when I took that step, I moved to a different agency, and I went to one of the agents there, Christina Chow. She's so wonderful. We were just sitting and having a coffee, and she was like, "Hey, I have this script I want to show you. Um, your cousin wrote it." And I'm like, "What? Who's my cousin? Like, what are you talking about?" And she's like, "Isaac Chung," and I was like, "What?" And Isaac is a cousin through marriage, but him and I had never really spoken about working together or even film, really. We'd met a couple times at family functions, but I didn't know Isaac that well. Um, but she handed me the script, and there was already that connection of that familial thing, which is like, how weird is this? Like, how strange and kismet this is. And then I went home, and I read the script. And prior to reading that script, not that I don't feel the importance of exploring identity or exploring culture, like that is paramount and so important, deeply important. But I always felt like the way that the lens and the gaze in which it was encased within was always, mm, it always flattened things that I had previously seen or perhaps even read. It felt like the narrative was more to explain ourselves as opposed to just express our freedom of reality and life. And so I was wary of those scripts
Right,
because
right. Makes
as a
sense.
performer, yeah, I kind of felt them as potential traps in some way, and so when I read this script, I was so moved by the deep humanity in which he wrote the script, that it wasn't seeking to explain itself, and it wasn't even looking at itself through its own gaze either.
Mhm.
I think that's the really special thing about what Isaac has done, is like he wrote something from his vantage point, but he didn't lock the characters into his vantage point. He instead like
Oh,
really
interesting.
expressed a truth of what happened physically, perhaps
Mhm.
in that moment, and then allowed the actors to imbue and carry that truth forward. And so when you read a script like that, that's so open and like welcoming and inviting, and like such a I guess like an open creative space for an actor to like really imbue
Uh-huh.
themselves within. That's when personally for me, I'm like, oh, I need to do that. And um, I warred with it personally because I think trying to tackle the concept of like playing my father's generation with their language issues and like the traumas that maybe perhaps they hadn't like addressed for themselves from their history down to the traumas that are placed down to us, our generation. Like I didn't know if I wanted to explore those things per se, or if I felt like I had the right to do so.
Uh-huh.
Um, but after like I literally talked to Isaac. I was like, Isaac, do you think we could change this to be like flashbacks where like I played the son and then like we can get another person to play the father, because I don't think I can do it and all this thing. And then luckily Isaac was,
He's like, no.
yeah, he was so wise and supportive that he was like, I think you can do this. And I needed that support to kind of carry me through. And you know, when it all kind of came together, it came together so quickly, so naturally, and so in some ways magically that I think we all the people that experienced it kind of still walk away from that being like, this one was something different. Yeah, this one was special.
Well, I think it premiered at Sundance, I
Mm,
believe. And I think that, I got all this buzz, heard all this buzz. It was a movie that I was trying to see before I got back on the plane, and I just couldn't see it. And I was so disappointed. And then it like really burst open for people. And I think that sometimes that something's special when you're doing it, or you feel that it's special when you're doing it. And then you
mm,
get to see that you were absolutely right, because it strikes a chord with people in a certain way that just confirms that it's special. I mean, some
mm,
of what you just said was so packed and interesting, though. So I want to
mm,
just like take note of a couple of things that I thought were especially like intriguing. One was just the sort of familial anxiety about sort of playing
mm.
up your parents' generation. I mean, I don't think everyone has that pressure. I think that there
Yes.
is something somewhat. I'm going to make an assumption, and you can just like blow me out
No,
of the
please.
water,
Yeah.
like
No,
being
yeah.
told I'm
This,
wrong.
I
Don't you
love these
worry.
conversations.
But but I do think there's some way in which you were talking about that, and the anxiety seemed to me to be also particular to um, the kinds of the kind of respect sometimes that people have sort of
Mm,
generationally, and not everybody has that.
hmm.
That's a cultural thing, I think, to some degree. Do you think that, or am I wrong? But I just feel like there's a
Yeah.
bit of pressure about like, I don't think everyone would be like, I'm worried about playing this generation. I just think other people
Yeah. Yeah.
look
Yeah.
at me right now.
100%. I think a lot of it is confounded too from maybe perhaps the immigrant Asian American perspective, because there's also just this uh, there's a massive disconnect that happens when you immigrate. I was 4 when I immigrated from Korea with my parents, and to be conscious of a life where I was deeply connected to my folks, where I could communicate to them, to then be thrust into a reality that slowly served to separate us more and more, where my language had fallen to the wayside, so I couldn't speak with them about things that I was going through. I had to grow up pretty quickly. I was calling the cable services and electric services from a young age because I needed to facilitate language for them. Or even as simple as like, immigrant experiences, like you were kind of tasked to give up more of your body than your mind in some ways. And so my parents had to give up their bodies, meaning like they had to go to work 20, like just ridiculous hours. So I never even really saw my folks like that often. We were latchkey kids, my brother and I, and that's a common story, I think, for a lot of kids of that generation and beyond. And so, what I'm unpacking now in my adulthood is just the feelings of abandonment that I felt that necessarily weren't tied to a physical abandonment. Like my parents were there, but
Right.
we were just so disconnected by culture that I had lost access to them. And so when I was viewing my dad and viewing that generation, I was viewing it from a place of like, this is what my father is. And the truth is that's not what my father is. This is what my father is. He is who my father is. And it took me a while to understand that concept for myself, because I had to deconstruct perhaps the pressure of feeling like I needed to represent all Korean fathers, which
No.
that's not a thing. You shouldn't put that weight on. And then also like, capturing mannerisms and capturing, and then also dealing with the fact that perhaps you don't even know your father because you've been busy unable to, because you've been, one, like cut off from being really able to communicate with him, and then two, you're dealing in this weird abandonment trauma amongst your peers that maybe relate to you, but you're concocting this image of a father or an image of a mother through your tales together, but like never really like deep dives into their humanity per se, on like a general term. Like I'm sure there's kids that have wonderful families that were able to traverse those things, but my family is very blue collar. You know, we come from, you know, just my parents ran a store. You know, they just had a store, and so you know, in feeling those ways, I had to really eliminate a lot of my own conception of my parents, including, and what was really cool about the discussions that we had was Isaac wrote this beautiful sequence at the end of a voiceover originally. I hope I can share this. I think he's okay with it, but like this voiceover sequence where he kind of captured the feeling of what our generation wants to say to our parents.
Oh, nice.
And oh my God, like even thinking about it makes me kind of weepy, but like I read it and I was bawling in the car, and I was just like, this is it. I want to tell this. I want to tell this about my parents. Like, this is what I want to do. And then we got closer and closer to the day that we were starting. And then Isaac did it ahead of time, but we had kind of been talking about it. And when he finally pulled the trigger on it, I was so happy to hear that he did it, which is he cut it.
Huh.
He cut that sequence. And it's because we don't even want to justify their existence through their suffering. They get to exist, period. And their existence is valid, period. They don't need to suffer. They don't need to be given toils and troubles and tribulations in trials in order to justify their existence here. And I think that's a lot of the narrative that, as true as it is, and it's not something to be ignored, it's to say that what we really wanted to capture in this film was the deep humanity of the inside look of what these people are experiencing and trying to do, and what they're striving for in this life. And yes, do they suffer? Absolutely. But do we need that to exist in order for them to exist? No. And when we threw that away, I was then able to really understand my dad for his ambitions and his desires and his will to keep pushing, as opposed to this second generation, in some ways, hidden shame that, please let my parents be here because look how much they suffered. It's like, which is like carrying your mom through a party that they're not comfortable in, and you feel good that you're carrying your mom through the party, but then you're apologizing for them being here constantly, being like, they suffered, like, please let my mom be here. And that's its own infantilization. And I think we all wanted to capture their true intentions and their viewpoint, and like why they came here and what they were looking for, and all those things. And we felt like those, you know, the images of how we classically depict immigrants were there in service to kind of cloud their natural humanity. Like, they're making choices in their life too.
Well, Jacob certainly, I mean, right?
Yes.
That's
Yeah,
a big choice.
totally.
I mean,
Absolutely.
with such heart and fear and all those things. It's interesting. I think, do you think that shooting on location grounded this even more in what you're talking about? Because you all were shooting in Arkansas, sort of.
We shot in
Did you
Oklahoma.
shoot
We
in
wanted to shoot.
Oklahoma?
We
Oh, you were
wanted
in
to shoot in
Tulsa.
Arkansas.
Okay,
Yeah,
near
we were in
Tulsa.
Tulsa.
Okay.
It was all additive. You know, the conditions were pretty rough. You know, it was hot. We were in a trailer most of
Last
the
summer,
time.
right?
Exactly. We were in a physical, like a beautifully. Our production designer, Young, she's incredible. She made like an image of our past, which was, I walked in and I was like, I'm transported. And that was so wonderful. And so, yeah, like truly this one was, I don't want to give it any self-importance. I really don't. It just feels like it made itself, and I just got to be a part of it. And that's kind of like, I don't know, I have no way of explaining that. I'm just like, I get to be the lucky one, but like I'm here being,
Well, you also
you know.
helped get it made, so thank you very much for that, even though I know that you are now sinking into your modest phase, which I really love. I've seen examples of it, like on video and stuff. It's a very interesting thing, and I would never, ever, given that there are lots of people who don't feel modest whatsoever, and that I would never want you to, even though I'm pointing it out, it's a beautiful thing. So, but you know, place is such a interesting thing in the US where we sort of try to paper over it in certain ways, right? And sort of
Mm,
bind each other with sort of certain kinds of things. But then at the same time, I think that people have often a very good sense of place. So, you know, certainly Isaac had a sense of place in making this film that is built on like remembrances of his childhood, it seems to
hmm.
me, right? And then you come from a place, it's like there are a few American cities where I go, okay, people from Baltimore feel this way about Baltimore. People from Philly feel this way about Philly. People
Yeah.
from or Detroit or around Detroit, you know,
Yeah.
you're from Troy, but I feel like, yeah, you still like got that
Mm.
sort of Detroit Pistons, Detroit, you know, got that Detroit thing. And I just feel like, would you talk just a little bit about your sort of how place built you?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I don't know if I fully figured it out. I think years of therapy will help me figure this out. But um, you know, I just come from a very collectivist minded reality. I think coming from, you know, 80s Korean mentality that my parents are locked in now. You know, they understand life as you play your part for the greater whole on a, like that's the function. And then I was raised very Christian, so there's that added feeling, and within the Korean church, which is like even more just like, you know, just about the collective. And then I think Michigan Midwest is kind of that same vibe. So I had like three layers of like, don't stick out, you know, like embedded into my code. And I think in that way, it built probably within me this weird battle between deeply wanting to be seen,
Mm.
but also like understanding that the role is service. So I don't know. It's just this like
No, it's an
weird middle
interesting
ground.
thing. It's probably why
Yeah.
you've gotten like some acting awards, including today. It's like because that's a very like that's wanting to be seen, but not necessarily as you. Do you know what I mean? It's like
Sure.
in the
Yeah.
service of like a character. It's in the service of a project, a film. It's like you've already said, you know, this film is special, and you know, and you sort of
Mm.
honor Jacob in the way that you were talking about, just sort of like understanding stuff. And certainly, you know, Ben and Bernie is, you know, was a man. That film was so unnerving and so good.
Thank you.
Yeah, really, really
Yeah.
something. But you did some particular things to develop that relationship to that character. Do you think of yourself as developing a relationship to a character? How do you think about that? Do you become that? I mean, at some point you seem to become that. Are you inhabiting? How does that work for you? Or how do you, which verb do you use?
My goodness. I'll be honest with you, like again, this is another one that I'll have to unpack way later in life, after I
You're a young
fully
man, but
understand
you're
it.
allowed to not have to. You know,
Yeah.
I think it's like always complicated to ask actors in particular um, questions about, I mean, that feel like they're sort of deconstructing their mojo in some way. It's like
Yeah.
part of why you're gifted and why you're good at what you do. I think you have access to that, but I don't think that's the same as being able to then sort of explain it in a sort of super rational way that I'm asking
Mm.
for.
I mean, part of me feels like what's happening at the end of it all is if you approach the work in a specific way, at least for me, um, where I'm really deeply trying to understand this other human being, this other character, what ends up happening is my self starts to recede to the side, and then I'm just kind of open to be a conduit for whatever thing is necessary at that moment.
Hmm, hmm.
I had that profound feeling with a lot of actually with most of my projects, and I don't know if I was consciously aware of what was happening. You know, I think maybe perhaps like if I do have a skill or talent, it's like I have just blind like I'll just dive into a reality and I'll be like, cool, this is what life is now. You know, that can have its own negative implications, which is like after I come out of it and I've made like all these wrong choices, there, you know, I have to deal with them in my real life. But in a given situation of like a film, I just kind of dive in head first. You know, I take what's happening even offset to inform what's happening on set. I just live it, and I don't want it to feel like it's. I know that maybe perhaps like the easiest way to like put that together is to say method, but I'm not. I don't think I'm method. Even I don't even know what I am. I'm
Right, right.
just trying to understand why this person exists and why they continue to exist. And when I do that work, it happens to change me too. And um, yeah, that's kind of what that's kind of the joy of what I've been able to find is to gaining empathy is pretty wonderful.
Yeah, because it's a
Yeah.
practice. Because empathy is a practice. I mean, that word's
Yes.
getting tossed around so much, and I love that
Yes.
word. I love that idea, but it is
Yes.
a practice. It is,
Yes.
and I think that that's what you're saying. You get to practice it perhaps more than some of us because
That's it.
you are in a
Yes.
profession of empathy.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes.
so I love that you said that you. So what did you learn? What stays with you from Jacob, and what things did you kind of want to jettison potentially? Because I feel like you
Mm.
take on that person, you are empathetic,
Yes.
but there's going to be some stuff where you're just like, I'm glad I want to. I sort of would like to maintain this connection to this experience, but this has got to kind of go. Are there things like
Yes.
that?
Well, my gosh, your questions are incredible. Well, I'll bring it back one step.
Yeah,
Ben,
shake him off.
Ben really helped me. I eventually had to shed him because going too far in that direction is not helpful. But I Ben helped me to understand who I am wherever I am, like the fullness of myself wherever I am,
Hmm.
even when I'm in the gaze of Americans, even when I'm in the gaze of Koreans, even when I'm in the gaze of other nationalities or structures or societal binds, I was able to find the fullness of who I am and feel free to explore that in a safe place, such as a film, which is so fortunate for me. And when I came back from that experience, I was probably a little cocky. I was probably a little full of myself. I was probably feeling in some ways that life was as nihilist as he was approaching it, where, you know, it's just whatever. But to have touched that for me during that time, and then quickly, where I'm very lucky is I'm very grounded by my family. Is, you know, then you come back and you're like, hey, you can't pull that shit here. Like, you know,
That's exactly what.
it's, yeah, you can't pull that shit here. And so there was that slow easing out of it that was probably painful for my wife, and also like deeply real for me, of just like understanding like where I bisect this character and like where I feel my fullness and then where that ends with this character.
Right.
And then with Jacob, it was, there's so many things I learned from that, which was I learned about, you know, the deep humanity of my parents' perspective,
Hmm.
and not from my own gaze, but perhaps from their gaze, as close as I could get, which was so wonderful. And then also within the construct of a marriage, I was able to really understand um, how much you are a part of something, like how much you're not separate from the thing. And I think men are tasked to, in a traditional society, very much like condition, or they're conditioned to feel separate from the thing that they are asked to give of themselves in the societal sense, to go get this thing and get their reward and bring it back for their family. And while doing so, you ignore the fact that like your family's upholding every other thing that you're just blindly ignoring. And you know, one particular scene that was really eye-opening for me was it one, like the cast was so incredible, and more specifically, Yeti. She's
Right.
so incredible. To act alongside her was really deeply wonderful because she held it in that pocket as well of just like believing in this reality, and like the wisdoms that I think you can glean from those interactions were so great. It was a scene where the barn is burning, and I, as an actor, I was like, hey, maybe this is a scene where I like really lose it. And like, I was excited to like play a stoic guy and then finally like lose it here. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go for it. And each time right before he called action, I couldn't muster up any emotion. I wasn't like ready to cry in that place. And like a younger, maybe less experienced me would have tried to force it and just really push it. But after the first two takes where I couldn't eke any real tears or anything like that, I was like, you know what? Maybe I'm not meant to cry. And so I listened to the moment. And then when I did it and just like went with the moment, and I looked over and I saw Yeti like bawling, like easily bawling, I was like, oh, you have been carrying the weight the whole time. Sorry.
I'm sorry. That's actually the way you tell that has me a little
Yeah.
forgiven too. It's like,
Yeah.
that's very deep.
Yeah. And it's not,
That's
and
cheap.
it's,
No one ever gets to do that to me, young man. I'm not like, I actually am not unaccustomed to people getting a little teary because I'm listening, and I think that's important. But evidently, I listened to you just a little too much there because now I'm
sorry.
like, uh-oh. Like I got to recover pretty quick.
Yeah. and,
Huh.
and, and, and I want to say like, I gain this perspective, but I screw up royally constantly, but like, it just was, that's what it is like to feel that understanding is, goodness gracious, like I wish everyone could feel that feeling. Like that's the addiction for me of this work, is just like, whoa, when you can feel such a humanity in those things, like feel a deep connection and understanding to those things. And so yeah, like that moment really opened my eyes. And then you know there I guess it's like, I guess like it was that it was just how much I was able to understand something that I had been separated from, which was really understanding the dynamics of a family, but then more specifically my own family that I
Yeah.
grew up with, and like the conversations that I never had with my own father, the conversations I never had with my own mother, the vantage points by which I saw their fights, the vantage points by which I saw my reality, and the feelings that I felt. It is deeply cathartic, and like this was like I got to do therapy as work, which was
Right.
bizarre. So yeah, and maybe the lasting thing that I was really left with by this film was a real emotional understanding of the concept of faith.
Yeah.
And I was raised very Christian, and like the concept of faith, as I understood it, very materially and like cerebrally, was just like faith, like believe, and like just believe. And that when I feel like there was a moment right before we started filming where I was in the shower, and I had been so scared up until that point about like my Korean, my broken English, about the performance, about what other Korean Americans are going to think about this, what Korean people are going to think about this, what I'm going to think about this, the massive monster that I built in my head about what I was attempting to tackle. And I was so scared, so scared, maybe more scared than I've ever been in a project in my life. And I was in the shower, and then I just started like weeping, and I was like crying, um, and this is such a crazy admission, but like I was crying, and then the feelings that overtook me were fear, joy, awe, and gratitude.
Mm-hmm.
And like all of those
Mm-hmm.
feelings kind of converged at the same time. And then I was like, yo, that might be faith. you know
I
and
love. I want that to be a
Yeah.
t-shirt. Yo, comedy.
Yo, that might be exactly. I'm in the shower. Yo, this is fate. As I'm like crying in the shower, and I came to that because it was all those feelings made me realize I was like, oh, like the universe has placed in front of me a task that isn't any greater or lesser than any other task that anyone else is going through, but it's just there and it's terrifying, but it's right in front of you. Are you going to do it or are you going to run? And I was like, cool. Like people spend their lives looking for the universe to tell them what they're supposed to do next. And for me to be blessed enough to be like, this is what you're doing is
Right,
like the most liberating feeling and the most grateful feeling. Cause now like the agonizing feeling of choice is taken off the table.
right, because
You're
you're just
just,
present.
that's
You
what you're
just
supposed
need
to
be
do.
present. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
this is
Just be
what.
present and do your best. And then that's what it's going to be.
Mhm.
Like fail or succeed, like whatever, like that's what you're supposed to do. And I don't know, that's kind of what I've been looking for these days anyhow. It's just like a binary way of looking at my life. It's just like, this is what I'm doing and that's not what I'm doing. And
Right.
this is what I'm doing. But
Oh,
yeah,
I love that.
I don't know why I get to be so lucky to experience these things, but truly, like it's been a trip. The last couple years have been a trip.
No doubt. Well, I have to say that the expression of sort of terror that you were talking about in the shower to some degree and facing that and then sort of, and having it, the other things converge with that. It's so funny because what I was thinking in part was just like, oh, zombies are so much easier. It's like, wow. I mean, really? The Walking Dead, no big deal. No big.
Mm,
And not to make light of what you just
yeah,
shared, it's just that if I don't ask a question about your
yeah,
experience with The Walking Dead, I probably will get chewed out by somebody. I don't know who, because I think your work is sort of so beautiful right now that it's like, oh, we can go back to that. But I guess my question would be, what did you learn about sort of popular culture and America's relationship to it by being sort of in a show
mm,
that was so, beloved and so sort of part of like, dude, you got like the cover of EW. It's like all that stuff.
yeah,
What did
yeah,
you learn
yeah.
about us, us, the vast us of, you know,
Right. I mean, there's so many thoughts I had. While I was in it, I had no idea.
mm,
Um, I was so young and new and happy to be there and grateful to be there that I didn't really have the mental freedom to like really assess what was happening. I was just kind of riding the ride as it was happening. Um, but in the rear view, I think in some ways like that was like wrestling.
mhm,
It was wrestling. It was your character and you play your persona and you play it as true as you can and the world is watching you play out this persona and they're buying your t-shirts or they're buying somebody other character's t-shirts or whatever it was. And there's something very profound about that. And there's something very profound about how much that's shifting these days. And I wonder
mhm,
if everyone's becoming their own wrestler.
hmm,
Like maybe we
yeah,
don't need to see someone, not so much now, but perhaps in the future. I don't know. I'm ruminating on like, this is like weird stuff, but um, I, I don't know. I think for me on a personal level, what I really gleaned from that experience was one on like uh, in work, it felt like I really understood how to be a professional on that thing, which was really
oh,
great.
that makes sense.
Um, yeah, like I really learned
If
just
you
how
can
to
get away
do
from episodic television, knowing how to be a professional, I mean, that should be because it's just so much work.
truly, but also to be surrounded by those professionals and those artists, like they were special people. They were special people that were very much in service of the whole at a time when I feel like America was really celebrating things that were not in service of the whole.
Mhm.
But really obsessed with the individual. And that was maybe perhaps one of the first things in a while that had come around that were about a collective of people. And I think perhaps that was the real, appeal to it in the beginning of
Right,
just like feeling together.
right,
And
right.
right. And then, it blew up and exploded into what it was. And um, but yeah, like the professionalism I gleaned from that, and then um, afterwards, I think I learned also in hindsight, like the beauty of being in service of something larger, of maybe the love you feel within those confines, and um, the safety you feel, and the camaraderie that you feel of all being in service of like a greater goal, which is like, in this case, it was to make this show.
Right.
And that was really wonderful. And that had echoed my upbringing
Hmm.
too, you know? And I remember when I had left the show, my wife was pregnant and we were about to get married, and we were moved into our new house. And thankfully she didn't like kill me for asking this, because she's just smarter than me. But she was just, I was like, babe, I don't know why, but I feel very lonely right now, but I have everything, but I feel so lonely. And she said, have you considered this the first time you're not part of a collective? And I was like, and then I like, then she got fuller, because I was like, oh, I'm like codependent, like morphing you into my life. Like, oh, you're a separate being as well. Like, I need to respect your thing. And so it was just all these profound thoughts that like, I had never really touched individualism,
Hmm.
I think. I don't
Interesting.
think I fully really touched individualism in the way that traditional Americans perhaps are raised within.
Right.
And it was the first kind of feeling of that. Uh, yeah. And then the subsequent things that I've gotten to be a part of have been more like studies about that. I feel like, if I can trace
Yeah.
it back, it wasn't on purpose, but
Hmm.
I see that my natural attraction to things were like, where can I feel full in myself? Because right now I'm by myself and I
Hmm.
don't know how to be by myself. I
Interesting.
only know who I am in relation to others. How's that?
How's that? As a like
Yeah.
last line in a interview that went by way too fast.
Yeah.
It's pretty awesome. It's actually quite moving. But mostly, I think we're Denver Film Festival goers are going to be really lucky to get to spend time with you. I mean, I wish it were in Denver in person, but this is pretty. Thank you for sharing so much, Stephen.
Oh
Really,
no, thank you for
we're
this
like,
conversation. I'm sorry if I
we're over time.
overtalked.
No, you.
I feel like people like know me now. I hope they don't know me now.
Well, I hope that they feel that I hope they listen, right? And like they know,
Mm.
that would be a weird assumption. We had 40 minutes. Guess what? They don't know
Yeah.
you. They do
Yeah.
not know.
Right
I
on,
don't
right on.
know you. I
Absolutely
wish
right
I
on.
did. I could pretend that somehow I now know you and we're just like this. But that is not how it works. And you should know that from like just what you said about wrestling. This is way more authentic than, that experience probably, but no, we don't know you. We just have learned a lot of better things about the choices you're making, and reasons to continue to be excited and watch your journey.
That's so
So
kind.
thank you for
Thank you
everything.
for this conversation. This was like
Yeah, absolutely.
great
Thank
for
you.
me. Thank
Cool,
you.
cool. Well, good luck with everything, and we'll see you again in
Yes, I
Denver.
hope so.
In Denver.
Yes, I'd love to come to Denver. I'll be
It's a
there.
great place. Please do. All right.
Thank
Thanks a
you.
lot.